never thought this kind of silence would be the soundtrack to my life. It wasn't a peaceful quiet. No, it was a hollowed-out silence, the kind that follows a great shattering noise and leaves a ringing in your ears. The house felt cavernous, its familiar groans and sighs only amplifying the absence of the one person who had filled it with life for 40 years. Robert. My husband passed away on a Tuesday in spring, the kind of day where the world outside was bursting with cruel, indifferent life. The dogwoods bloomed, their pink and white petals like confetti for a party I wasn't invited to. For a year, I had been moving through the rooms of our life together like a ghost, a curator of a museum only I would ever visit. My days fell into a rhythm of quiet, lonely tasks. Waking up, making coffee, for one. Tending to the garden we planted together, my hands in the same soil his had worked. The evenings were the worst, when the sun would dip below the trees and the long shadows would creep into the living room, whispering of memories that were now sharp enough to cut. I was 58, an age that feels both settled and strangely unmoored. I had been a wife, a partner, a mother. Now, I was a widow. The word felt like a heavy cloak, something I had to wear, but that didn't quite fit. My life, which had once felt like a well-worn path, was now a foggy, unfamiliar landscape. I told myself I was fine. I told myself this was the natural order of things, a grief I had to carry with dignity. But the truth was, I felt invisible. I felt like the color had drained from my world, leaving everything in shades of gray. My son Liam was my only anchor. He was 30, with Robert's kind eyes but a quiet intensity that was all his own. After the funeral, he'd packed up his city apartment, put his career as a graphic designer on hold, and moved back into his childhood bedroom. "Just for a while, Mom," he'd said, his voice gentle. "Just until you're back on your feet." I was grateful, of course. His presence was a comfort, a warm light in the suffocating darkness. He'd mow the lawn, fix the leaky faucet in the guest bathroom, carry in the heavy bags of groceries. He was a good son, dutiful and caring, and I loved him for it. But in those first few months, I saw him only through the lens of my grief. He was a fragment of Robert, a living, breathing reminder of the family we once were. Our interactions were polite, functional. We revolved around each other in the quiet house, two celestial bodies held in the orbit of a shared loss, but never truly connecting. We were mother and son, playing our prescribed roles. But then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, things began to shift. It didn't happen with a grand gesture or a dramatic conversation. It happened in the spaces between words, in the quiet moments that make up a life. It started in the garden. It was a damp Saturday afternoon. The air smelled of rain and rich earth. I was on my knees, wrestling with a stubborn patch of weeds that had taken over the rose bushes. My back ached, and a wave of frustration and weariness washed over me. It felt like a metaphor for my life, a constant, losing battle against decay. The back door slid open. "Need a hand?" Liam asked. He didn't wait for an answer. He came and knelt in the damp soil beside me, his jeans instantly soaking through. For a long while, we worked in silence, the only sound the rhythmic tug and rip of roots from the earth. The silence wasn't empty, though. It was companionable, solid, down. "You know," he said, his voice soft, "Dad always hated this part. He loved the flowers, but he said weeding was a punishment for wanting something beautiful." I managed a small, watery smile. He was right. Your father wanted the beauty without the work. It was a familiar, fond complaint. "But you love it, don't you?" he asked, and he turned to look at me. And his gaze, it was different. It wasn't the look of a son making small talk with his grieving mother. It was observant, intent. He was really looking at me, at the smudge of dirt on my cheek, at the way my brow was furrowed in concentration. I felt a strange flutter in my chest. "I don't know if I love it," I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. "But I understand it. You have to clear away the dead things to make room for new growth." He held my gaze for a moment longer, his eyes full of a strange, unreadable emotion. "Yeah," he said softly. You do. He didn't just see a widow tending her late husband's garden. He saw me, Eleanor. A woman with her hands in the dirt, finding a difficult truth among the weeds. In that moment, I felt a tiny, dormant seed of something I hadn't felt in years begin to stir. I felt seen. That evening, the shift continued. Liam was cooking. The scent of garlic and rosemary filled the kitchen, a smell that was so different from the bland, simple meals I'd been making for myself. I was sitting at the kitchen table, nursing a cup of tea, watching him move around the space that had been my domain for decades. He moved with an easy, unself-conscious grace. He was searing chicken in the cast-iron skillet, the one Robert had always said was too heavy. I found that old cookbook of Grandma's, he said, nodding towards a worn, flour-dusted book on the counter. Thought I'd try her lemon rosemary chicken. You always said it was your favorite. Tears pricked my eyes. It was my favorite. Robert had preferred beef, so we rarely had it. It was a small detail, a memory I thought was mine alone, but Liam had remembered. He hadn't just picked a recipe. He'd chosen one that was connected to me, to my history before I was just Robert's wife. I remember, I said, my voice thick. He turned from the stove, a wooden spoon in his hand, and gave me a soft, knowing smile. I remember you humming when you ate it, he said. You only hum when you're really happy. And there it was again. That feeling. He didn't just remember the food. He remembered my joy. He saw the woman I had been, the one who hummed. A part of me I thought had been buried with my husband. We ate dinner not in front of the television, as Robert and I often had in our later years, but at the dining room table. We talked. Not about the past, not about our grief, but about little things. A book he was reading. A story from his work. He asked for my opinion on a design project he was tinkering with on his laptop, valuing my aesthetic sense. I found myself laughing, a real, genuine laugh that felt rusty in my throat. And in the soft glow of the dining room light, I saw him not as my little boy, but as a man. A kind, perceptive, and deeply gentle man. And I felt a pang of something sharp and unfamiliar. It wasn't just gratitude. It was a connection, a current of warmth that flowed between us, filling the hollow spaces in the house. I told myself it was just the comfort of having him here, the natural deepening of a bond between a mother and son in the wake of a tragedy. It was a safe and easy explanation. But then there were the touches. They were small things, so fleeting they could almost be dismissed as accidents. His hand brushing mine as we both reached for the coffee pot in the morning. His fingers grazing my arm to get my attention when I was lost in thought, staring out the window. But they weren't accidents. There was a deliberation to them, a gentleness that lingered. One evening I was trying to get a heavy box of old photo albums down from the top shelf of the hall closet. I was standing precariously on a stool, my fingers just brushing the edge of the cardboard. Whoa, hold on. Liam's voice came from behind me, startling me. I wobbled. In a second, he was there. His body pressed lightly against my back to steady me, one hand coming to rest firmly on my hip, the other easily reaching over my head to slide the box down. For a single, breathless moment, I was frozen. I was acutely aware of his warmth, the solid presence of him behind me, the scent of his skin, clean soap, and something uniquely him. His hand didn't move from my hip right away. It stayed there, a point of heat and pressure that seemed to ground me to the spot. My breath caught in my throat. The air grew thick, charged with unspoken energy. It was a simple, protective gesture. And yet, it felt like so much more. It felt intimate. He stepped back, taking the box with him. Got it, he said, his voice a little rough. He cleared his throat and didn't quite meet my eyes. Let's put this on the table. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I felt a blush creep up my neck. I felt flustered, confused, and alive. It was a feeling I associated with my youth, with the thrilling, terrifying, early days of falling in love with Robert. To feel it now, in my own hallway, with my own son, it felt wrong. It felt dangerous. I told myself I was being ridiculous. I was a lonely widow, starved for affection, and I was misinterpreting a simple act of filial care. I had to stop. I had to push these strange, unsettling feelings down. So I tried to pull back. I made myself busier, spent more time in the garden alone, retreated to my room earlier in the evenings with a book. I tried to rebuild the polite, safe distance between us. But Liam seemed to sense it. He didn't push. He simply waited. He would leave a cup of my favorite tea on the table by my garden chair. He would start a fire in the fireplace on a chilly evening and just sit in the quiet glow, creating a space so warm and inviting I couldn't help but eventually drift in. One night, the dam of my resolve finally broke. A storm was raging outside, the wind howling and rattling the window frames. The power had flickered and died an hour ago, and we were sitting in the living room, the only light coming from a constellation of candles on the coffee table and the flickering flames in the fireplace. The shadows danced on the walls, making the room feel like a cozy, protected cave against the wildness of the world. I had been trying to read, but the words were just black squiggles on the page. The storm, the darkness, it had all conspired to bring my grief crashing back in on me with renewed force. A tear slid down my cheek, then another. I tried to wipe them away, but a choked sob escaped my lips. "Mom." Liam's voice was soft in the near darkness. I couldn't speak. I just shook my head, my shoulders heaving. I felt so utterly broken, so ashamed of my weakness. He moved from his armchair to the sofa, sitting not too close, but near enough that I could feel his warmth. He didn't say, "Don't cry," or "It will be okay." He just sat there, a silent, steady presence in the storm, both outside and within me. After a few minutes, his hand tentatively reached out and covered mine where it lay clenched in my lap. His touch was warm and firm. It wasn't a gesture of pity. It was a gesture of solidarity, an anchor. "It's okay to not be okay, Eleanor," he whispered. He had used my name, not Mom. Eleanor, too. Hearing it in his voice, in that moment of raw vulnerability, was like a key turning in a lock deep inside me. He wasn't talking to his mother. He was talking to a person. To me. "I just feel so lost," I finally managed to say, my voice raspy. "I feel like I don't know who I am without him. I look in the mirror, and I see a stranger. It's been over a year. I should be better. But I feel erased," he said, his thumb beginning to draw slow, soothing circles on the back of my hand. The simple, repetitive motion was hypnotic, calming the frantic fluttering in my chest. "I see you." That phrase again. "I see you." "What do you see?" I whispered, the question hanging in the candlelit air between us. He was quiet for a long time, the only sound the crackle of the fire and the drumming of the rain. I thought maybe he wouldn't answer. But then he spoke, his voice low and full of a profound sincerity that made my heart ache. "I see the woman who taught me how to read, not just the words, but the stories between the lines. I see the woman who could make a garden grow out of sheer force of will. I see the woman who hums when she eats lemon chicken." He paused, his grip on my hand tightening slightly. "I see a woman who is stronger than she thinks she is, and more beautiful than she knows." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Every defense I had built, every wall of denial I had constructed, crumbled into dust. He wasn't just offering comfort. He was holding up a mirror, and in it, he was showing me a version of myself I thought had died with Robert. A version that was whole, desirable, and worthy of being seen. "Oh, Liam," I breathed, and a fresh wave of tears came, but this time they weren't tears of grief. They were tears of a painful, overwhelming release. I told myself this was the pinnacle of a son's love for his mother. A beautiful, sacred moment of connection born from shared pain. But a treacherous, insistent voice in the deepest part of my soul whispered that it was something more. It was a connection between two people, two spirits, that defied easy labels. And it both thrilled me and terrified me to my very core. The days that followed the storm felt different. The air between us was charged with a new awareness. The roles of mother and son felt like ill-fitting costumes we had finally shed. We were just Eleanor and Liam. Two people living in a quiet house, navigating an unspoken, profound shift in the landscape of our relationship. The small intimacies became more frequent and more deliberate. When he'd hand me a mug of coffee, his fingers would linger against mine. When we'd pass in the narrow hallway, his hand would rest for a moment on the small of my back. These weren't accidental, not anymore. They were a language, a quiet conversation that spoke of a deep and growing tenderness. We fell into a new domestic rhythm that felt less like a shared grief and more like a shared life. We cooked together almost every night, our bodies moving in a familiar dance around the kitchen island. We'd take long walks in the woods behind the house, the crunch of leaves under our feet, a comfortable percussion to our easy silences. We weren't just coexisting, we were building something new in the shell of the old. A new kind of home. My guilt was a constant, low hum beneath the surface of my newfound joy. This is wrong, my inner critic, who sounded suspiciously like my late Aunt Carol, would hiss. He is your son. People would be horrified. And yet, what was wrong? A shared glance. A lingering touch. A comfortable silence filled with unspoken understanding. There was nothing sordid, nothing inappropriate in our actions. The wrongness was all in the interpretation, in the labels society would be so quick to apply. The truth was, I hadn't felt this vibrant, this alive, in 30 years. Liam's presence, his attention, was like water on a parched and dormant garden. I was beginning to bloom again, in ways I never thought possible. Was I supposed to apologize for that? Was I supposed to crush this fledgling feeling of life, just because the container it came in was unconventional? One afternoon, he came to find me in the living room. I was curled on the sofa, trying to mend a tear in one of Robert's old sweaters. It was a pointless task, really. A form of penance. Liam stood in the doorway for a moment, just watching me. "You don't have to do that," he said softly. I looked up, my needle poised in midair. "Do what?" "Keep trying to patch up the past," he said, walking over. He sat on the coffee table in front of me, his knees almost touching mine. "It's okay to let it go. It's okay to make something new." He gently took the sweater from my hands, setting it aside. Then he took my hands in his. My fingers were calloused from the garden, my knuckles slightly swollen with age. They were a mother's hands, a widow's hands. But the way he held them, with such reverence and tenderness, made them feel beautiful. "Ma, Eleanor," he began, his voice hesitant but firm. "We need to talk about this. About us." My heart leaped into my throat. I don't know what you mean." The lie was flimsy, pathetic. A sad smile touched his lips. "Yes, you do," he said gently. "And it's okay. I feel it too." He squeezed my hands. "I know this is complicated. I know it's not conventional, but it's real. What I feel when I'm with you. It's the most real thing in my life." "You are my son," I whispered, the words a desperate plea. "I am," he agreed, his gaze steady and unwavering. "And I will always be your son, and you will always be my mother. Nothing can ever change that. But can't we be more?" "Not in the way the world would think," he added quickly, as if sensing my fear. "Not in a way that dishonors Dad's memory. But more." He searched for the words, his brow furrowed. "When I'm with you, I feel peaceful. I feel seen in a way no one has ever seen me. And I see you. I see this incredible, strong, beautiful woman who has been hiding herself away. All I want is to keep seeing her, to be the person she feels safe enough to be herself with. Is that so wrong?" Tears streamed down my face. He had taken the chaotic, terrifying storm of my feelings and given them a name. Not obsession, not impropriety, but a safe harbor. A sacred space for two souls to simply be, without judgment. "No," I whispered, the truth of it resonating through my entire being. "It's not wrong." His relief was palpable, a soft exhale of breath. He lifted one of my hands and pressed a soft, chaste kiss to my knuckles. It was a kiss of fealty, of devotion. It was the most profoundly intimate gesture I had ever experienced. It held more love, more respect, more raw, honest connection than any passionate embrace from my youth. In that moment, the guilt didn't vanish, but it transformed. It was no longer a weapon to punish myself with, but a reminder of precious, fragile, and unconventional nature of what we were building. This connection was ours. It didn't need a name. It didn't need the world's understanding or approval. It only needed our courage to accept it. We were treading in uncharted waters, and we both knew it. The true test came a few weeks later, in the form of my sister, Claire. Claire was a woman who lived by the rules. She had a proper marriage, a proper house in the suburbs, and a very proper and rigid set of opinions about how a grieving widow should behave. Her visit was a whirlwind of sympathetic platitudes and unsolicited advice. She found Liam and me in the kitchen, preparing lunch together. I was chopping vegetables while he stirred a sauce on the stove. We were laughing about something, a shared joke, when she walked in. She stopped short, her smile tightening at the edges. "Well, isn't this cozy?" she said, her tone dripping with false brightness. "It's just wonderful that you have Liam here to take care of you, Eleanor. A son's duty is so important. Most boys his age would be off living their own lives." The words hung in the air, heavy and sharp. Take care of you. A son's duty. She had, with a few careless words, reduced our connection back to its most basic, socially acceptable template. She had rendered me a helpless, pitiable widow, and him a dutiful, sacrificial son. She had erased everything we had become. I felt the old invisibility creeping back, a cold shroud. I opened my mouth to protest, to say something, but the words wouldn't come. What could I possibly say that she would understand? But Liam spoke. He turned from the stove, his expression calm, but his eyes like flint. "I'm not here out of duty, Claire," he said, his voice quiet but carrying an undeniable weight. "And I'm not taking care of my mother. She's perfectly capable of taking care of herself." He took a step towards me, and in a gesture that was both a shock and a profound declaration, he put his arm around my shoulders and drew me to his side. It was a protective, possessive gesture, acclaiming. He looked directly at my sister, his gaze unflinching. "I am here because I want to be here," he said, his voice clear and steady. "I am here because my life is better with her in it. Not just as my mother, but as my friend, as my partner in this house. We are building a life here together. It's our life, and we're very happy." The silence that followed was thunderous. Claire's jaw was practically on the floor. She stared at his arm around my shoulder, then at my face, searching for some sign of impropriety she could latch onto. But all she saw was two people standing together, united. A team. "Well, I never," she stammered, flustered and confused by a dynamic she had no framework for. "No," Liam said, his voice soft. That was the moment that shocked me. It wasn't a confession of a forbidden love. It was a quiet, courageous, and public redefinition of our relationship. It was Liam, my son, my friend, my partner, standing up to the world and declaring that our bond was our own. It belonged to us, and we would not allow it to be squeezed into a shape that made others comfortable. He hadn't just stood up for me, he had stood up for us. After Claire's hasty and awkward departure, the house fell silent again. But it was a different kind of silence. It was a comfortable, solid silence, filled with the weight of what had just happened. I turned to Liam, my heart a wild drum against my ribs. My eyes were full of tears, but for the first time, they held no grief, no confusion, and no guilt. They were filled with a love so immense and overwhelming, it left me breathless. "Thank you," I whispered. He just smiled, a slow, gentle smile that reached his eyes. He raised his hand and tenderly tucked a stray strand of hair behind my ear, his fingers brushing against my cheek. "There's nothing to thank me for," he said. "I was just telling the truth." And that was the truth of it. We weren't a conventional story. We were something far more rare and precious. We were two souls who had found each other in the wreckage of a shared loss and had built a new world from the pieces. A world where a mother could be seen as a woman, and a son could be a steadfast anchor, and their love could be a quiet, sacred space that was all their own. My life is not a sad story of a widow whiling away her final years. It's a love story, but not the kind that is written about in novels or shown in movies. It's a quiet, complex, and deeply personal story of being found, of being seen, and of the shocking, beautiful, and life-affirming discovery that the most profound connections often refuse to be defined by a single word. I no longer look in the mirror and see a stranger. I see Eleanor, a woman who is humming again. And in the quiet hum of my happy, unconventional life, I have finally, truly come home.